David Fields is the most terrifying character on this show. And this is a show that includes a lot of yelling and screaming, some of it productive, much more of it not. But no one is quite as icily, haughtily devastating as Fields. He is the fundamental antithesis of what this show is about. Not simply a bad guy, though he very much is brutal and apathetic to the harm he causes those who work under him, but fundamentally opposed to what the show prioritizes, which is this messy, democratic sense of connection and community of people from different backgrounds who do not have all the answers, discovering the truth through their own labor, through their own commitment, working together, not to arrive at some perfect, predestined truth, but to find for themselves what works the best for them. Fields is the exact opposite. He has this almost mechanistically perfect vision of what the ideal meals he serves should be, and he makes sure that they live up to that standard. I once heard Fields described as running an almost fascistic enterprise, and while I think fascism is a very overused term these days, very overused, I think there is something to the use of that term as it applies to Fields, insofar as it describes something that is a fundamentally modern form of authoritarian control. It is the attempt to look upon this chaotic, out-of-control, uncertain world and create something perfectly, rigidly ordered in a way that is very mechanical, very industrial, dehumanizing almost intentionally. It is a process that fundamentally crushes the will and the ego of the individual so that they can serve this larger whole, this greater collective, at which Fields presents himself as the leader, the immaculate boss, who creates this almost uncanny world of perfection, rigidity, a fundamental mechanistic, modern, coldly beautiful form of food production. It is worth noting why this appeals to Carmy, because it did. Carmy was severely traumatized by his experiences with Fields, and he does not want to replicate them. But he was drawn to that environment for a reason. Something that goes beyond wanting to be a great chef. That specific kind of environment. That complete destruction of the ego very much appealed to him. Carmy's life growing up was loud, it was noisy, it was chaotic. His family was not very supportive. It was grungy and careless, full of selfish people. Fields is in many ways the exact opposite of that. Not that he is not also selfish, he very much is. But the environment is the exact opposite. It's very quiet. It's very refined. It is authoritarianism, but authoritarianism done with elegance and precision. and a bit of glamour to it, as opposed to the grungy, rather heated, volcanic environment that Carmy felt so overwhelmed in growing up, an environment that left as severe, if not more severe, a mark on him than Fields. I think it's important to think about Carmy's time here, not just as something that both turned him into a great chef and deeply destroyed him as a emotional, individual human being, though it did both, but as this perhaps misguided attempt to find some haven from the kind of life he left behind. Even when Fields threatens Carmy, and he does threaten him quite often, his threatening is extremely controlled. It's extremely restrained. There is not a single word that is out of place. There is not a single word that was not carefully chosen. It is the exact opposite of the chaotic fights in Carmy's home growing up. That's not to say it's not devastating. If anything, it's more devastating. But it is an environment where the complete sense of control, the complete sense of power, is established very carefully, very specifically and precisely. Just like the food itself, every word that comes out of Fields' mouth, every movement he makes is very rehearsed, very refined. It is the triumph of the artificial, the controlled, the contained over the natural, the organic, the spontaneous, which is what Carmy, at this point, was deeply afraid of. But ultimately, while this does appeal to Carmy at first, and while he benefits from this environment in some ways, it does create a vastly different example from what he knew growing up, and it did, in fact, have a positive effect professionally for him. It does not lead to a coherent, healthy, emotional path forward for Carmy. I think about what Hannah Arendt says about fascism, if we're going to continue the analogy regarding Fields. A lot of quotes from Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism are taken out of context and used in ways I think are kind of shallow and don't really encapsulate the fullness of the book, which is less about how fascism and totalitarianism as a whole operates, and more about the specifically modern conditions that led to it coming into being, and what specifically makes it different from past versions of authoritarianism. That being this emphasis on complete control, the mechanistic process, the complete submission of people into a single unifying ideological vision. All of these things, Arendt says, are fundamentally modern, are fundamentally creations of the 20th century, and they're creations in response to the chaos and upheaval of the 19th, the fundamental deracination of people, the fundamental uprooting of people from a specific sense of community, of history, of family, and throwing them out into an uncertain and transient world where there's no sense of cohesion, no sense of grandiose meaning. no sense of fundamental purpose in the lives people are leading. They're not connected to anything greater than themselves, and so they fall into this sense of malaise. There is this deep isolation that did not exist before. Isolation on a societal scale. And this is specifically what totalitarianism preys on. It provides, in a specifically modern and totalizing and mechanistic way, that sense of purpose, that sense of order and cohesion that people are lacking, and so it appeals to them. Fields appeals to Carmy, I think, for a similar reason. It is exactly what he was lacking. It is not loud and brash and unpredictable. It is incredibly predictable. It is extremely finely tuned. It is not the clashing of egos. It is the fundamental subsuming of egos, the fundamental crushing of egos in service of this grand absolute purpose. This is appealing to Carmy, I think. The ability to completely shut oneself down, be detached from family troubles, and commit oneself wholly into this larger machine that Fields creates. But ultimately, this is not a healthy way to respond. This doesn't give him a coherent path forward as a human being. He needs to develop a sense of community, sense of connection with others, to give him that larger sense of purpose, that larger sense of being at ease, being at peace. Not at peace in terms of not having any problems. There are always problems. But finding an environment that provides a sense of comfort, a sense of stability, a sense of belonging to this greater whole, in a way that does not require the crushing of the self. He never really had that, and that is ultimately what he ends up creating at the Bear, or at least he tries his best. Oftentimes he replicates bad tendencies from his family or from the Fields days, but he understands their insufficiency. Obviously, I don't think that the other workers at the Bear can or should be the ones to heal Carmy's problems. He can only do that himself, but it's also important to recognize that that's not something that occurs in isolation. What Carmy needs is this healthy communal environment. This is what he has been lacking. His upbringing failed him to one extreme. His time with Fields failed him to another. What he is looking for is something kind of like democracy. Democracy not in terms of everyone going out and voting, but in terms of a world that is fundamentally constantly being made and remade and determined and redetermined by the people living in it, in a way that is a bit unstable, a bit uncomfortable at times, but fundamentally pro-social and pro-communal, not dictated from on high and not complete anarchy like he had at home, but a sense of forming connections with other human beings. Sydney, I think, is the greatest example of this, and the one to which he's the closest, the one who has really helped him the most. One can take that in a romantic direction, and yeah, I think it would be a nice pairing at some point, but it's not even about that. It's about the sense of people from different backgrounds coming together, teaching each other, not through simple didacticism, but through working together, through deciding between themselves what works, what's beneficial for the group as a whole. This builds a coherent sense of community. It builds a sense of an organically formed and warm environment that is both solid and reliable enough to provide a sense of meaning, a sense of greater purpose, and personable enough that it invites people to really think about what they want both for themselves and for the greater whole, and not have their spirits crushed and subsumed under this grand totalizing authoritarian project. Carmy is struggling and flailing toward a more healthy environment, a more healthy sense of a community that he can build with others that will benefit both him and them. He's not always the best at reaching toward that goal, but he does recognize that sense of lack that both Fields and his home life gave him, and he's trying to remedy that in ways that are flawed and imperfect, but demonstrate the desperate will of someone to be better, to really find a healthy milieu that he can participate in a productive and thoughtful and democratic way. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. When I say democratic, I do not mean to undermine Carmy's authority here in his kitchen. He is the leader in a sense, but he is not a leader in the same way that Fields is. This is fundamentally an environment where truth is discovered communally by people working together to meet challenges they face. It's not something that is proclaimed by a great genius on high. So anyway, tune soon for the next analysis. Will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.